The day the sky fell silent. The first sign that something was wrong was the silence. In the high peaks of the Embercrest Mountains, silence did not exist naturally. Wind sang through jagged stone. Steam hissed from warm fissures. Wings thundered against thin mountain air. Young dragonlings screeched in defiance of gravity as they leapt from ledges too early and landed in scrapes of pride and dust. But that morning, the sky above the nesting cliffs was empty. No clumsy dives. No triumphant squeals. No smoke rings drifting lazily over the valley. Only stillness. High Matron Verilith felt it before she understood it. The ancient silver dragon stood at the edge of the basalt cliff, her wings folded tightly against her long, scarred body. Her eyes, bright as molten steel, swept across the horizon again and again. Nothing. Behind her, other adult dragons shifted uneasily. They were practicing at dawn, rumbled Theros the Bronze, his voice deep as distant thunder. 6 of them near the lower thermals. Verilith did not respond immediately. She inhaled slowly, drawing in the scent of wind, stone, moss. And something else. Humans. Her eyes narrowed. Below the cliffs, beyond the winding tree line and the ribbon of river that divided wild from cultivated land, smoke rose from the human settlement of Grey Hollow. The dragons had tolerated Grey Hollow for 3 generations. There had been skirmishes once, long ago, when men with iron nets believed dragon fire could be harvested like cattle milk. That misunderstanding had ended swiftly. Since then, an uneasy peace. The humans stayed low. The dragons stayed high. Boundaries respected. Until today. Verilith turned sharply, her claws carving furrows in stone. They have taken them. The words rolled through the cliffside like a coming storm. Theros bared his fangs, then we burned their wooden nests to ash. Several dragons growled in agreement, smoke curled from nostrils, sparks flickered between teeth. But Verilith lifted one wing. Silence fell again. No, the single word held centuries of authority. If humans have taken our young, fire will only ensure their deaths. The truth of that struck like cold rain. Dragonlings could not yet regulate their flame. They could not defend themselves against iron. They could not survive long without guidance. Verilith's gaze remained fixed on Grey Hollow. If this is an act of war, she said quietly, it will not begin with blind rage. Far below, the human village moved as it always had. Or so it seemed. In Grey Hollow, Elias Carter had not meant to find dragons. At 12 years old, Elias had meant only to skip chores. The morning had been bright and warm, perfect for exploring the woods beyond the eastern ridge. He and his younger sister Myra had convinced 3 other children, Jonah, Selene, and little Bram, to follow. They carried sticks for swords, a rope in case of treasure, and a sack of stolen apples. They had not carried nets. They had not carried irons. They had not carried fear. Which was perhaps why the dragonlings had not fled. The 6 young dragons were gathered in a shallow valley just beyond the tree line, a place where the slope dipped before rising sharply toward the cliffs. They were magnificent. And awkward. Wings too large for their bodies. Limbs all angles and uncertain strength. Scales not yet hardened to full brilliance. One red. One pale blue. 2 bronze twins. 1 greens. And the smallest, a shimmering silver with bright, uncertain eyes. They were attempting to fly. Attempting being the critical word. One would run, leap, flap furiously, rise perhaps 3 feet, then tumble into bracken with an indignant squeal. The human children had frozen at the sight. Jonah had whispered, "We are absolutely dead." Myra had whispered back, "They're bobbies." That had changed everything. The smallest silver dragonling tried again, scrambling up a boulder twice her height. She spread trembling wings, looked skyward, toward distant cliffs far beyond her reach, and jumped. She dropped like a thrown rock. Elias did not think. He ran forward. He collided with something surprisingly warm and scaled, and far heavier than expected. They both rolled. Leaves exploded into the air. The dragonling lay stunned. Elias blinked up at a face the size of a shield. Golden eyes met brown ones. They stared at each other. Then the dragonling sneezed. A puff of smoke escaped her nostrils and singed the edge of Elia's hair. Myra burst out laughing. And astonishingly, so did the dragonling. It was not the roar of an adult dragon. It was high and chirping and oddly delighted. The other 5 dragonlings stopped their attempts and gathered, curiosity overwhelming instinct. Selene stepped forward slowly, palms open. "We're not going to hurt you," she said softly. The red dragonling tilted his head. The bronze twins sniffed Jonah cautiously. Bram dropped an apple in sheer panic. The green dragonling pounced on it. Chaos followed. Apples rolled. Dragonlings chased. Children shouted. Wings flapped. And somewhere between the confusion and the laughter, something extraordinary happened. Fear dissolved. High above, Verilith circled lower that afternoon, careful to remain unseen by human eyes. She expected cages. She expected chains. She expected screams. Instead, she heard laughter. Not human laughter alone. Dragon laughter. Her massive wings slowed. She angled silently toward the forest clearing. And there, below the tree canopy, she saw it. Her missing dragonlings. Alive, unbound, covered in dirt. The red one was attempting to mimic something Elias demonstrated, arms wide, running downhill before leaping. The children were showing them how to catch air. Not as dragons did, but as humans imagined it. "Feel the wind first," Myra shouted. "Don't fight it," Selene added. The bronze twins flapped unevenly and collided midair, tumbling together in a heap. The children rushed forward, not in attack but in assistance. Elias helped the silver dragonling back onto her feet. He pointed upward. "Wings down first, then push." The dragonling squinted at him. Then tried again. She leapt, flapped, adjusted, and for one miraculous heartbeat, she glided. Not falling, not flailing, gliding. Her surprised chirp turned into exhilarated shrieking as she landed clumsily but upright. The other dragonlings roared in encouragement. The children cheered louder. Verilith remained motionless in the sky. Her ancient mind struggled to reconcile what she saw. Humans teaching dragons to fly. Not through domination, not through force, but through imitation, through laughter, through shared failure. Theros landed beside her on a neighboring ridge, silent and tense. "Where are they?" he whispered. Verilith did not answer. She merely angled her wing downward. Theros followed her gaze. He saw children pushing a dragonling gently back up the hill. He saw apples shared. He saw Jonah attempting to flap his own arms, while the green dragon copied him with startling seriousness. He saw no chains, no irons, no fear, only joy. Theros exhaled slowly, smoke drifting into the wind. "They are playings." "Yes," Verilith murmured. Below, the silver dragonling managed a longer glide. This time she landed beside Elias and butted her head gently against his shoulder. He laughed and scratched carefully beneath her jaw ridge. "Trust, unquestioned, unforced." Verilith felt something unfamiliar stir in her ancient chest. Not suspicion, not fury, but awe. The problem, peace between dragons and humans had always been maintained through distance. Distance prevented misunderstanding. Distance prevented bloodshed. But distance also prevented this. Connection. Verilith watched as the dragonlings lined up for another attempt. The children formed a cheering line. On 3, Elias called. 1, 2, 3. 6 dragonlings leapt. Wings thundered unevenly. Leaves exploded. 2 crashed. 1 rolled. 1 face-planted. But 2 caught the rising thermal. Just barely. They lifted higher than ever before. The clearing erupted with celebration. Verilith felt her throat tighten. They were learning faster. Because the humans were not teaching them as dragons did. Dragons taught through command. Through instinct, through survival, humans taught through encouragement, through repetition, through absurd optimism. Verilith knew what this meant. If the rest of the dragonflight saw this, some would see hope, others would see weakness, and a few would see opportunity for war. Because if dragonlings could bond with human children, then centuries of separation would begin to crumble. Theros spoke quietly. What do we do? Verilith watched Elias lift the silver dragonling again after another tumble. The boy did not hesitate. He did not fear being burned. He simply helped. We watch, she said at last. And we learned. Below, the dragonlings laughed again. Above, the ancient dragons circled silently. And for the first time in generations, the sky did not feel divided. It felt shared. When the elders learned the truths, the secret lasted 3 days. 3 impossible, golden, terrifying days. Each morning, before the sun climbed high enough to gild the Embercrest cliffs, 6 dragonlings slipped from their nesting ledges. They were meant to practice near the upper thermals under watchful adult eyes. Instead, they veered low. They flew badly, unevenly, determinedly toward the tree line. Toward the clearing. Toward laughter. And each morning, 5 human children invented new ways to teach creatures born of fire how to trust the air. The clearing of first attempts. By the second day, the lessons had structure. Elias had decided that if dragons were going to learn properly, they needed real training. He had never trained anything larger than a stubborn goat, but that did not slow his confidence. Balance first, he declared, hands on hips, as though addressing an army. The red dragonling, whom Myra had boldly named Ember, snorted smoke in agreement. The smallest silver dragonling had taken to following Elias closely. She listened intently whenever he spoke, head tilted, eyes bright. Myra had named her Sky. The bronze twins became Crash and Bang for obvious reasons. The green dragonling was called Moss. The pale blue one, quieter and thoughtful, was River. Names stuck quickly, not because dragons required them, but because humans did. Okay, Elias continued, dragging a fallen log into position at the top of a slope. You run to here, then jump, don't flap right away. Moss blinked. Ember flapped immediately. He slammed into Elias and knocked him flat. Myra burst into laughter so loud even the birds startled. The dragonlings made chirping sounds that were unmistakably amusement. Sky stepped carefully over Elias and tried again. She ran, leapt, did not flap. For a breath, she fell. Then she angled one wing slightly. Air caught. Her body shifted. She slid forward through open space instead of dropping straight down. It lasted only 2 heartbeats. But it was progress. Selene clapped enthusiastically. That's it, feel how it holds you. Sky landed in a bush and emerged with twigs tangled between her horns. Elias stood brushing dirt from his shirt. You see, he said proudly, you don't fight the sky, you let it help. The words were simple, but above the clearing, hidden in shifting clouds. Verilith listened. The watching. She had not intended to watch again. She had intended to forbid it. To roar. To reclaim the young and restore order before rumors spread through the dragonflight. Yet something held her. Something she had not felt since her own youth, when the world had been new and frightening and wondrous all at once. Curiosity. Below, human children were teaching dragonlings concepts dragons themselves rarely verbalized. Dragons were born to fly. It was instinct, blood deep. They did not explain thermals. They did not speak of balance. They leapt. They learned. They survived. Those who did not. But humans studied the air as though it were a puzzle to be solved. They described it, encouraged it. They cheered mistakes. They celebrated effort. Verilith watched Sky attempt again. Watched Elias run beside her. Watched him fall deliberately down the slope, arms wide, shouting, "See, like this." Sky mimicked him. She stretched her wings outward but angled them more carefully. Her body leveled. The air lifted her just slightly. And this time she did not panic. She wrote it. 3 heartbeats. 4, 5. She glided halfway down the clearing before landing upright. The children erupted. Sky reared back and released a triumphant squeal that echoed through the trees. Verilith's chest tightened. She had not taught Sky that. None of them had. And yet, Sky was learning. Trouble in Grey Hollow. The problem did not begin with dragons. It began with footprints. Jonah's father, Thomas Hale, had followed the unusual tracks at the forest edge out of simple caution. He expected deer. Perhaps a stray cow. What he found were gouges in bark, burn marks in stone, and impressions in soft soil larger than any wolf. He knelt slowly. His stomach went cold. Dragon. Small but dragon. He followed the trail deeper. And then he heard it. Laughter. High, bright, children's laughter. And beneath it, a sound like a bellows filling. Thomas moved silently between trees. He saw his son first. Jonah was standing at the base of a slope, arms waving wildly. Not both wings at once, the boy shouted. Thomas stepped forward. And the world stopped. 6 dragonlings stood in the clearing. Not attacking, not rampaging, but lining up like students. Elias was at the top of the hill, gesturing confidently. Myra sat cross-legged beside Moss, holding an apple while the green dragon carefully tried to peel it with one claw. Sky leapt, glided, landed. Jonah cheered. Thomas felt his knees weaken. His son was 3 strides from creatures that could incinerate the village. And he was laughing. Thomas's first instinct was to shout, to grab Jonah and run, to raise the alarm. But then, Sky stumbled on landing. Jonah rushed forward instinctively and steadied her wing. She lowered her head gently against his shoulder. Careful, trusting. Thomas saw no malice, no hungers, only youth. He stepped back into shadow. He did not interrupt. Not yet. The Dragon Council. That evening, Verilith summoned the elders. They gathered in the grand ledge, where wind roared through ancient stone arches carved by time. Theros stood at her right. Ignivar the Crimson, oldest of the Firekin, perched opposite. Several others formed a half-circle. You have watched, Ignivar said without preamble. Oh yes, and Verilith did not speak immediately. She allowed the wind to fill the silence. They were not taken. Murmurs rippled. They go willingly. Low growls. Humans, one dragon spat. Oh yes. Flames licked along Ignivar's jaw. Then the humans have ensnared them with softness. It is a tactic. Verilith's gaze sharpened. Have you seen it? Ignivar hesitated. No, I have. She stepped forward. They are not captured, they are not harmed, they are taught. Dragons shifted uneasily. Taught what? Theros asked quietly. To trust the air. That silenced them. Ignivar's eyes narrowed. Dragons require no human instruction to fly. Then why, Verilith asked calmly, has Sky doubled her glide in 3 days? Ignivar faltered. Verilith continued. Humans do not teach as we do, they encourage repetition, they celebrate effort, they remove fear from failure. A younger dragon snorted, fear strengthens. It also cripples. The words struck harder than flame. Verilith turned toward the valley. For generations we have remained apart, we believed distance preserved peace. And you would end that, Ignivar demanded. I would understand it. Discovery. The 4th morning changed everything. Elias arrived at the clearing early. He carried a crude drawing charcoal on parchment of wing angles. Selene had helped him sketch it by lantern light. If you tilt this part, Elias explained to Sky, pointing carefully, you don't drop so fast. Sky blinked thoughtfully. The dragonlings gathered. They were improving rapidly now. Even Crash and Bang managed brief coordinated lifts. River had begun experimenting with small bursts of frost to stabilize his landing. Laughter filled the clearing. Then, the trees shook. A massive shadow fell across the slope. The children froze. Dragonlings snapped their heads upward. Verilith descended. She did not roar. She did not bare fangs. She landed with controlled grace at the edge of the clearing. Leaves exploded outward from the force. The ground trembled. The children stood motionless. Elias felt his legs turn to water. Sky stepped forward. Not away. Forward. She chirped excitedly and bounded toward Verilith. The ancient silver dragon lowered her head. Sky pressed her snout against Verilith's jaw and made a series of eager trilling sounds. Verilith listened. Her eyes shifted slowly toward the human children. Elias swallowed hard and stepped in front of the others. He did not know why. He only knew it felt necessary. We didn't steal them, he said, voice trembling but steady enough. They come because they want to. Verilith's gaze bore into him. He felt small, fragile, insignificant. And yet, he did not look away. They were falling wrong, he continued softly. We just helped. Behind him, Myra stepped up beside him. We would never hurt them. The dragonlings gathered protectively around the children. An astonishing sight. Verilith observed it all. Then she did something no dragon elder had done in 300 years. She spoke to a human child. Why? The word echoed not through air but through mind. Elias gasped as the voice brushed his thoughts. He hesitated, then answered honestly. Because they were trying so hard. The clearing fell silent. Verilith searched his expression. There was no greed. No calculations. Only sincerity. They are not yours, she said gently. I know. Yet you teach them. Oh, yes. Why? Elias struggled for words. Because nobody should have to fall alone. Something ancient shifted in Verilith's heart. Behind her, Theros landed heavily. The other elders had followed. Now the clearing held not 6 dragonlings, but a dozen adult dragons. The children trembled. The dragonlings pressed closer to them instead of retreating. Ignivar descended last. His crimson scales glowed faintly. This is folly, he growled. Attachment invites weakness. Sky turned sharply and stood between Ignivar and Elias. She spread her wings not in threat. In protection. The gesture stunned every dragon present. Ignivar stared. Verilith felt pride swell like a rising thermal. They have learned more than flight, she murmured. The test. Ignivar's voice rolled across the clearing. If humans teach so well, let them prove it. He stepped forward, massive and imposing. Teach them now in front of us. The challenge hung heavy. Elias swallowed. His knives threatened mutiny. But Sky nudged him. Softly, trusting him. He looked at the slope, at the trees, at the watching elders, then at Sky. Okay, he whispered. He walked to the top of the hill. Sky followed. The other dragonlings lined up beside her. Elias turned to face them all. Remember, he said louder now, don't flap too soon, feel it first, let it hold you. His voice shook, but he stood tall. Ready. The dragonlings crouched. The adult dragons leaned forward. Go. 6 dragonlings leapt. For one terrifying instant, it looked like disaster. Then, they angled. They adjusted. They caught the rising thermal that curled along the slope. One by ones, they lifted. Not wildly, not desperately, but smoothly, coordinated, confident. They glided past the watching elders in a wide arc and landed beyond the clearing with controlled grace. Silence. Utter silence. Then, Sky turned midair and gave a delighted cry. The sound rang through valley and cliff alike. The human children erupted in cheers. Even the bronze twins managed a second pass before landing. Verilith felt tears burn behind ancient eyes. Ignivar did not speak. He watched the dragonlings run back up the hill eagerly. They were not weakened. They were not diminished. They were joyful. Stronger for it. Theros exhaled a plume of smoke that drifted harmlessly skyward. It appears, he rumbled quietly, that humans have something to teach us. Ignivar finally lowered his head. Or perhaps, he admitted slowly, we have something to learn. The beginning of something new. Word spread through both Dragonflight and Village. Veer flickered at first. Humans armed themselves cautiously. Dragons circled warily. But when Thomas Hale stepped into the clearing that afternoon and saw Verilith standing calmly beside Elias, he did not raise a weapon. He removed his hat. Verilith inclined her head. A gesture small, but monumental. Children and dragonlings resumed their practice. Under supervision now. Under watchful eyes. But still, with laughter. For the first time in centuries, dragon shadows passed over Grey Hollow without panic. For the first time ever, human children raced dragonlings down a hill not in terror, but in friendship. And high above, the sky felt wider. Not because dragons ruled it alone, but because it was shared. The day the sky chose both. Peace did not arrive like a banner raised. It arrived like cautious footsteps on fragile ice. For weeks after the clearing confrontation, dragons and humans occupied the same valley with a politeness so careful it was almost painful. Adult dragons remained watchful from the ridgelines. Armed villagers lingered near the forest's edge. Conversations were brief, movements deliberate. But the children refused to be afraid. Each morning, Elias and Myra returned to the slope. Jonah followed. Selene brought parchment to sketch wing positions. Bram carried apples and declared himself official morale officer. And the dragonlings met them without hesitation. What began as secret laughter became open practice. And what began as tolerance began slowly to resemble trust. A sky rewritten. Under the supervision of Verilith and Theros, the dragonlings advanced with startling speed. Sky became the most adept at gliding, her silver scales flashing brilliantly as she carved smooth arcs through the air. Ember mastered controlled bursts of flame to give himself small upward boosts mid-flight. River learned to create subtle temperature shifts beneath his wings, cooling the air to increase lift. Even Crash and Bang began synchronizing their takeoffs, turning chaotic flailing into coordinated motion. But it was not simply that they flew better. It was how they flew. They did not launch alone anymore. They launched to cheering. They launched with hands raised in encouragement. They launched knowing that if they stumbled, someone would run forward to help. Verilith observed something profound. The dragonlings were not merely learning aerodynamics. They were learning confidence without fear. Dragons had always believed strength was forged in solitude. Humans demonstrated that strength could also be forged in support. It unsettled some elders. It inspired others. Ignivar said nothing, but he watched closely. The threat beyond the ridge. Trouble came not from within. It came from beyond. Beyond Embercrest. Beyond Grey Hollow. From men who did not know laughter in the clearing. From men who remembered old legends differently. Far east in the fortified city of Blackmoor, rumors had reached sharp ears. Dragons descending near human settlements. Villagers not fleeing. Smoke seen but no destruction. Commander Halbrecht of Blackmoor had built his reputation on one principle: control the monster before it controls you. He had lost a brother to dragonfire 20 years earlier. He had not forgotten. Scouts confirmed sightings. Dragon activity had increased. Human children seen near winged shapes. To Halbrecht, there was only one explanation. The dragons were embedding themselves. Preparing. Planning. He would not wait for flames. He marched. 200 armored soldiers. Ballistae mounted on reinforced wagons. Nets woven with iron chain. Crossbows tipped with barbed bolts. They advanced toward Grey Hollow under the pretense of protection. The first arrow. The day the soldiers arrived, the sky was flawless blue. Sky and Elias stood at the top of the hill, reviewing a new maneuver. After you glide, Elias explained, gesturing with both arms, tilt slightly left if the wind shifts. Sky chirped confidently. Below them, Ember and Moss practiced short bursts of vertical lift. Verilith and Tharos observed from above. Then, the whistle cut the air. An arrow struck the ground inches from Elia's boot. The clearing froze. A second arrow grazed Moss's wing membrane. The dragonling shrieked. From the tree line emerged armored figures. Halbrecht rode at the front, visor lifted. "Children away from the beasts," he commanded. Panic exploded through the clearing. Jonah grabbed Bram and pulled him back. Selene stumbled. Myra stood frozen. Sky stepped in front of Ilias instinctively, wings spread. Verilith's roar split the sky. It shook leaves from trees. It rattled armors. Adult dragons descended in a storm of wings. Halbrecht did not retreat. "Loose," he ordered. Bolts fired. One struck Ember's shoulder. The dragonling collapsed with a cry that cut deeper than steel. The human children screamed. Verilith landed between soldiers and younglings, fury blazing. "Stand down," Thomas Hale shouted from the village edge, rushing forward with several townsfolk. "They are not attacking." Halbrecht sneered, "You are blind." Another volley fired. Tharos deflected 2 bolts with his wing. Ignivar arrived like a falling star, crimson scales blazing. The air filled with smoke. Chaos teetered on the brink. The choice. Sky turned toward Ilias. Her golden eyes reflected fear. Not for herself. For him. Ilias looked at the soldiers. At the dragonlings bleeding in dirt. At adults ready to unleash devastation. He understood something in that instant. If either side struck fully, Grey Hollow would burn. He ran directly between Halbrecht's men and the dragons. "Stop," he shouted. Halbrecht stared in disbelief. "Boy, move." "No." Arrows wavered uncertainly. Elias spread his arms wide. "They saved us," he yelled. "They didn't take us, they're learning." Halbrecht's expression hardened. "They are beasts." "They're children," Myra cried, running beside her brother. Sky stepped up behind Elias. Carefully, slowly, she lowered her head beside his shoulder. Not threatening, not roaring, just present. The soldiers hesitated. Verilith did not move. Her restraint trembled like a taut wire. Halbrecht raised his hand for another volley. And Sky did something no one expected. She leapt, not at the soldiers, into the air. Wounded Moss whimpered behind her. Sky circled once above the clearing. Then she glided. Perfectly, controlled. She dipped low over Halbrecht's formation. Not attacking, demonstrating. She banked gracefully, adjusted to a crosswind, landed softly beside Ilias. The silence that followed was enormous. The soldiers had expected fire. They saw flight. Halbrecht's jaw tightened. This proves nothing. Then, River took off. Then Ember, despite his injury, lifted shakily with Moss supported beneath him. Crash and Bang launched together in flawless synchronization. 6 dragonlings filled the sky. Not with destruction, with mastery. And below, human children shouted guidance, encouragement, corrections. The soldiers stared upward. Verilith spoke not aloud but into Halbrecht's mind. "They are not weapons." He staggered slightly at the intrusion. "They are youngs." Ignivar stepped forward, flames curling faintly but restrained. "We have not struck your village." Tharos added, voice like rolling stone, "You strike ours." Halbrecht looked around. He saw villagers standing beside dragons. He saw children unafraid. He saw dragonlings landing gently near human hands. He saw no cages, no dominations, only partnerships. His certainty faltered. The breaking point. One soldier panicked. He fired without command. The bolt flew straight toward Myra. Time fractured. Sky intercepted midair. The bolt pierced her shoulder. She crashed into Ilias, knocking him clear. Verilith roared. The sound carried centuries of wrath. Flames ignited along Ignivar's spine. Theros crouched to launch. Halbrecht realized in horror what was seconds from unfolding. If dragons unleashed, his men would die. The village would burn. Everything would spiral beyond recall. Stand down, he bellowed. Weapons lowered. Too late to undo the wound. But not too late to prevent annihilation. Elias crawled to Sky's side. Her breath came shallow. Myra pressed trembling hands against the bleeding wound. She saved me, Elias whispered fiercely. Verilith lowered her massive head beside the fallen dragonling. Her eyes burned not with rage now, but with grief. Halbrecht dismounted slowly. He approached cautiously, removing his gauntlet. He looked at the bolt embedded in Sky's wing. At the child holding her. At the dragon elder restraining Apocalypse. Understanding dawned not gently, but forcefully. This was not an invasion, he said quietly. No, Thomas Hale replied, it was a lesson. Halbrecht knelt. He snapped the shaft carefully and withdrew the bolt under Verilith's watchful gaze. Sky whimpered but did not strike. Myra whispered soothingly. Verilith sealed the wound with controlled silver flame, precise healing ancient. Sky's breathing steadied. Halbrecht stood slowly. He looked at Elias. You stood between us. Oh yes. Why? Elias met his eyes. Because nobody should have to fall alone. The words carried across soldiers and dragons alike. Ignivar closed his eyes briefly. Theros exhaled smoke that dissipated peacefully. Halbrecht removed his helmet. He turned to his men. We withdraw. No one argued. Aftermath. The army retreated before sunset. Not defeated. Enlightened. Halbrecht would carry the memory of that clearing longer than any scar. Back in Blackmoor, reports would change. Language would soften. Policy would shift. Not instantly, but undeniably. In Grey Hollow, healing took time. Sky recovered under Verilith's constant watch. The dragonlings trained more cautiously. Human guards no longer aimed weapons at shadows. Instead, joint watchposts formed. Humans learned to read dragon flight patterns. Dragons learned village signals. Fear did not vanish overnight, but it no longer ruled. The first shared flight. Weeks later, under a sky brushed gold by evening sun, Verilith called both village and dragonflight to the clearing. Sky stood strong once more. Her wing bore a faint silver scar. Elias stood beside her. You have changed more than flight, Verilith said, her voice resonating through air and mind alike. She turned to the assembled dragons. Strength need not stand alone. She turned to the humans. Courage is not measured by fire. Sky crouched. Elias hesitated. She nudged him gently. He understood. With trembling hands, he climbed onto her back. Gasps rippled through villagers. Even Theros blinked in surprise. Sky spread her wings. She leapt. The air caught. They rose together. Higher, higher still. The clearing shrank below. Elias gripped carefully but did not cling in terror. He left. Sky answered with a jubilant cry. Other dragonlings followed. Not carrying riders yet, but flying in formation around them. Humans shielded their eyes and stared upward in awe. Dragons circled protectively. For the first time in recorded memory, a human flew not as prey, not as captive, but as partner. Verilith watched them arc across the valley. The sky did not belong to dragons alone anymore. Nor was it conquered by humans. It was shared. The legacy. Years later, scholars would write of that season as the joining. Trade routes would open between Blackmoor and Embercrest. Joint patrols would guard mountain passes. Human glider designs would improve dramatically with dragon guidance. Dragon training would incorporate human methodology. Young dragonlings would spend part of their early learning seasons in the valley clearing. And every new generation would hear the story. Of the day dragon children vanished. Of the laughter that followed. Of the arrow that nearly ended everything. Of the choice not to burn. Of a boy who stood unarmed between fire and steel. Of a silver dragon who chose to shield rather than strike. And of the moment the sky itself seemed to exhale. Relieved, because it no longer had to divide those who looked up at it in wonder. Above Embercrest, Verilith often watched Elias and Sky soar together. Theros would land beside her. You were right, he would admit quietly. Verilith would shake her great silver head. No, she would say. The children were. Below them, human voices and dragon calls intertwined. And the wind that once separated cliff from village now carried a different sound. Not wars, not warnings, but laughter, bright, defiant, shared.